All right, we're in the home of Dr. Stanley and Pearl Goodman, who are wonderful collectors. And you can see part of their collection behind us and also see some of the sculptures that Stanley made himself. So let's start off just by talking about your interest in art and what got you into collecting.
Well, first of all, I've been doing art for a long time. I started off by doing a little painting. I didn't do well in painting, but I moved into sculpture and I found marble sculpture pretty good. So we've been doing that for a very long time, actually since the 1960s. So we had an interest in art, and as we lived here in this house, we've been in the house since 1967, we began to accumulate a little art on the walls. Mostly we got it at charity auctions or some minor things that it was not a major endeavor. We were just interested. We picked up things here and there, and we ultimately had a lot of art in the house. And we picked up art type things in our travels. So we have a lot of, when we started to travel, we started to try to find the things in the countries that were artistic rather than to try and get pieces of silverware or things like that. And so we've got a lot of things in the house over the years of an artistic nature from different places. Well, somewhere along the way, as the kids grew up and got out of the house, and we looked at this, and we said, you know, this is very nice, but we really need to improve this art collection. We really need to do something to upgrade it, whatever that meant at the time. And it took us a long time to figure out what we really meant by doing that. That we would go to some art shows, we would start to go to some galleries when we went to New York, and just looking around at art to see what was going on. It eventually dawned on us that if you're going to do this, that you have to focus down, that you have to collect something that's specific. That enables you to understand what you're collecting. If you just collect, well, I like this and buy it, you don't understand it. So in order to understand what you're buying and to have some expertise in what you're buying, you have to focus down. And so the next job was to figure out what we wanted to focus down on. So we looked around, and Pearl, you can tell how we got to where we are and collecting what we're collecting.
Well, we had been to Mexico many times. I have relatives in Mexico. We knew Mexican art because in Mexico City, there's art everywhere. All of the buildings have murals, the interior and the exterior. And one fine day in 1990, we went to Art Miami. And there was a little Siqueiros drawing, which we said, gee whiz, that's Mexican art, and it's really nice. Well, we bought this little Siqueiros drawing, which is sort of interesting because he did it when he was in prison. Anyway, and there's a prison cell number on the drawing. The following year, we went back to Art Miami, and we bought a Zuniga bronze. Zuniga is a sculptor in Mexico. So that was very nice. We had two Mexican art pieces, which we really loved. We had been going to New York for many years. Our daughter lived up there. So we said, who does Latin American art in Manhattan? And we came upon Marianne Martin. Marianne Martin's experience was interesting because she was the one who introduced Latin American art as a department at Sotheby's. So she now owns a gallery, wandered into Marianne. Marianne has 3 Zuniga drawings that had been given to her, that she had purchased from a customer. And she said, look, if you can use 2 of these Zuniga drawings, I can give you a bargain. Well, nobody passes up a bargain. So we then bought 2 Zuniga drawings. We now had a Siqueiros, a Zuniga bronze, and 2 Zuniga drawings. But more importantly, Marianne knew everything about the Latin American art show, having been at Sotheby's. She told us about the Latin American art auctions, which take place in May and November. told us about the catalogs that come out prior to the auctions that we can subscribe to.
So by the time you went to the auctions, I mean, when you go to an auction, you're looking at specific pieces that you're interested in buying and everything. How did you identify before that the artists that you thought would be essential or important for the collection?
Well, we asked a lot of questions. For one thing, we knew about Diego Rivera Orozco Siqueiros. When you go to these auctions, there's a preview period. And the people who run the auction houses are there to answer questions. We also started reading a little bit about it, because our aim was actually to get the key people in each one of the Latin American countries. So who are the key people? We really didn't know who the key people were. Once we started studying a little bit more, we soon learned that Lam is important for Cuba. Torres Garcia is important for Uruguay. Mata is important. Well, he hardly lives in Chile much, but still he's Chilean. So that's how we picked up a lot of knowledge.
We had to get 2 bits of knowledge, actually, and one important decision. The important decision was, at what economic level do we collect the art? Because you could buy inexpensive pieces that are works on paper or lithographs, and you can buy expensive pieces that are good quality oil on canvases. And I must say, it was Mary Ann Martin who pushed us in the direction that we ended up going. The second thing we needed to know, if you wanted to get good pieces of art, whatever good meant, is that you had to know what you were looking at. You had to know the difference between a piece of art that was good, that was representative of this artist, that was done in his major period when he was the most important, and you had to know what it looked like. And you had to have some vague idea of how much you should pay for this, so that you don't get carried away at auction and bid some astronomical number that people do.
Now, as you were building this collection, it was also work that you were going to live with. So tell us a little bit about the house, how the house, in a sense, helped shape the collection. Because you don't like to store things, right? You like to keep everything on view.
Well, the size of the house certainly limits what you can buy. We couldn't get enormously big pieces. We had to get pieces that would work. And we were very careful in what we selected. We always had to agree on what we purchased. That was agreed upon. The house did, at different points we thought, well, maybe we would expand the house, but we didn't do that. So anyway, we were limited to some extent by the size of the house.
Actually, the limiting factor turned out to be 50 inches. After going around with a ruler a lot of times, I figured out that if a piece was beyond 50 inches in any dimension, there's no sense bothering to try to buy it because it won't fit.
So what kind of criteria did you use for identifying works that you wanted in the collection?
Well, first of all, we got the works of the half a dozen really major artists: Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, Tamayo, Wifredo Lam, Mata, Torres Garcia. These are like a half a dozen of the really most important people. And then we started to fill in with other people who are related to them in some way or another. It's interesting, for example, one of the collection is modern, what is called modern Latin American art, which really starts with Diego Rivera around 1920s and runs up until these people died. Some of them lived to a long time into the 2000s, but mostly in the 30s, 40s, 50s. So it's that period that we mostly collect, but we go outside of that a little bit. Like, for example, we got a Badia, who was contemporary Cuban American, because he relates to Lam. He also, like Lam, he paints the Afro-Cuban religion. So we got that because it related, and we got other people because they relate in some way or another to all of these things. We have a big collection, well, not a big collection, a significant collection of the students of Torres Garcia, a Uruguayan artist, and we have his students. And there was a significant group of surrealist artists who came from Europe during the war and settled in Mexico. Carrington, Varro, and a few other people who are surrealists. And so we began to collect that group of people. And so all of these sort of tie together in what we hope is a sort of coherent collection of what we call Latin American Art 101.
Just thing I want to add, if you look at the collection, there aren't any landscapes or still lifes in the collection. I think one of the things that we look for, at least I know I look for very much in a painting, is what does it tell me? How do I respond to it? And in most cases, there's a story. For one thing, I love dedicated paintings. There are a couple of dedicated paintings in the collection, which are wonderful.
Those are paintings that are dedicated to a certain person.
The artist dedicated the painting to a specific person. I find that very exciting because once you look back upon who is this person, what's going on, it makes the painting that much more important.
It's interesting that we discovered this later on. As we went about buying the paintings, we bought paintings that interested us personally. And after we had a lot of them up on the wall, then we said, this is interesting. Look, a lot of these are figurative paintings. Look how many have figures in them. And look that there's no landscapes here, and that there are no still lifes. There are abstract paintings here, surrealist paintings, but this seems to be what we're interested in. It's stuff we live with, it's stuff we enjoy, and this is what we like.
It satisfies a need within us, basically, to have selected these to begin with.
So that was another question that I had was, what has this meant to you? What has this collecting meant to you over time? What's it done for you?
It has become our life. We spend so much time looking for things, talking about things, talking to people about things, rejecting things that people offer us because they don't quite fit the bill. I would say our life revolves around the paintings. It's been fun, and it's been something that we do together, which has also made it very, very exciting because it's something that we both enjoy and we do it together. So it has been part of our life, I must admit.
Which brings us to the Isle of Man.
Well, we'll talk.
We got to talk about the Isle. This is a good place to talk about.
Well, you're going to talk. Oh, you want to talk about the Isle of Man now, or when you get to the painting? Because
well, we'll talk about it now. So anyhow, this Mexican group of expatriates is a Carrington. And so we bumped into Carrington's sister-in-law. She's British, by the way. And
this is Leonora Carrington.
This is Leonora Carrington, yes.
And we bumped into her sister-in-law at an auction. And we said, listen, we're interested in Carrington. If you have some paintings of her that you want to sell sometime, let us know. So a couple of years later, she says, yes, I have a couple of paintings I'd like to sell. Sends us some pictures. But the paintings turn out that she lives in the Isle of Man, wherever that is. And the paintings are in the Isle of Man. And so we have to decide how we're going to handle this. We can't send the paintings back. We can't buy them without seeing it. So we decide, well, we're going to go to the Isle of Man. So that's what we did. We copped an airplane and went to the Isle of Man and looked at a couple of paintings she had and got all of her stories about the life of this artist because she was her sister-in-law. And ended up not liking the painting well enough to buy it. So it was an interesting trip, and this is how we spend a certain amount of time, is going to places, and we've been to, we've been to Sao Paulo and we've been to Mexico, of course, and although the truth is, most of the stuff is bought in New York. But so that's how we spend our time.
So the work really needs to speak to you. You're not collecting names, you're collecting artworks, and you have to be patient with that you wind up
we have
turning down.
We turned down many. One of the pieces, a Torres Garcia, was, which we will talk about, was seen in Paris. It was in Paris. They quoted us a price. It was a little crazy, and it's a key piece in that collection, incidentally. When we came back, we told our good friend Mary Ann Martin about this piece, and she says, oh, she knows everything, so she said, oh, I know that piece. I will get it eventually. 2 years later, she got the piece. We purchased the piece. So it's sort of...
For not such an outrageous price.
For not such an outrageous price, exactly. So...
that's why we only have 76 paintings.
If we had more wall space, we would have more money. We would have more paintings. We pass up an awful lot of things that we'd like to have, but I mean, you just can't buy everything.
We're in front now of a wall of works by a group of artists that were known as the School of the South out of Uruguay. And the leader of the group was Joaquín Torres García, who did the two works that you see here. And Stanley, maybe you can tell us about the two works. And
this work here is the key work of Torres Garcia. Basically, Torres Garcia's idea was to, within a grid, a geometric grid, to have a language of art that was all his own. And so you see two things in this painting. First, that there's a geometric grid, think Mondrian, and within that grid there's a series of symbols. These symbols don't necessarily apply to things we usually had. He had his own language, and he had a series of symbols within this group. And this is one of the most important paintings within our collection. Before he developed this total grid with the symbols in it, the painting over here is just a little earlier painting, and you can see a geometric grid that he laid out in terms of, but now he's just doing a port scene in Uruguay, and he did a lot of port scenes prior to doing this geometric grid. His importance is that he set up a school in Uruguay, and he had a number of students. And we decided to collect the students as part of the collection. And so we have several of his students. You want to talk about them?
We have several of his students. It's difficult to see on the wall, but Mato, Alpuy, Palos. Actually, one of the pieces in the collection is by his son, Augusto Torres. Also, Gurevich. We have several Gurevich pieces. Fonseca is another one of his important people in the School of the South. We have a Fonseca a sculpture, which is of great interest. So he really was very instrumental in the art of Uruguay.
Interestingly enough, Torres Garcia can be looked upon as the forerunner of geometric abstract art in Latin America. We haven't really collected the geometric abstract very much. It's not our sensibility, but he's a forerunner of this school.
Okay, now this is quite an unusual piece. This is by Frida Kahlo, the famous Mexican artist. And it's actually a two-sided piece, and you were saying that it was from a diary of hers.
Actually, right? Frida Kahlo had a diary, and there are 4 pages that are missing from the diary. And this is one of the 4 pages that isn't presently in the diary. And the piece consists of a portrait of herself that she did on one side of the page, and on the other side, a sort of a love note to her husband, Diego Rivera. Frida Kahlo didn't do a lot of paintings, and she's very popular, so her work is really hard to come by. But this is an interesting piece that's surrealistic. You can see her Mexican roots coming out of her hair, and at the same time it's kind of a cubistic piece. And it's dated Coyoacán, which is where she lived, which is a suburb of Mexico City, 1945. I'd like to say a few words about what's in the back. On the back of the page, which you can sort of see in the mirror, it's a two-sided piece. She has this poem which sort of begins as follows. Tuesday, March 13th, 1945. Intensity. Your hands on my shoulders, your lips on my neck. Well, it goes on from there. We'll leave that to the photograph. So it's an interesting piece by a very important Mexican artist, surrealistic and sort of abstract as well.
So this is the piece you mentioned before. This is the first piece in the Latin American collection, and you bought it at Art Miami, right?
Yes, we did, Peter. This is a very interesting piece. It is the first piece we bought, and it's by Siqueiros. There are a couple of makes this piece particularly interesting. First of all, the content of the piece. When you look at the content of this piece, mother, child, warmth, it expressed agony, yet it had an intensity about it, and it involved figures, humans, and this was pretty indicative of how this collection was going to go. If we go through the collection, it has a lot of pieces that are that kind of feel. Even more interesting is Siqueiros was one of the Mexican revolutionaries. They were always in and out of prison for one reason or another, and if you look at, actually there's a little number. It says Siqueiros 664. That was his prison cell. It was done while he was in prison. So that makes this a very important painting to me personally.
So here we have two more of the School of the South artists. This painting is by Gurevich, and it has the grid that Stanley was talking about earlier, but you can sort of make out two heads in it, right?
Yeah, well, you can make out two heads, and this is a very fun painting because I always say that this is Stanley and me, and I'm talking, and he's just not listening. So, interestingly enough, when you're buying and looking for art, you look for it everywhere. This little painting was bought in Houston, Texas. We went to the Inverted Utopias and wandered into a gallery, and there was something that fit right into the collection, and we bought it. So we've always enjoyed this little painting. Of course, the fact that it's very personal, it tells a story.
Right. And then a sculpture here. This is one of the few sculptures that you have that's not by Stanley. Tell us a little bit about this Fonseca.
This Fonseca was another one of Torres Garcia's students in the School of the South, and it's a very interesting piece insofar as the parts pick up. If one looks carefully, they can see the steps going up to the village here, and Fonseca is a very important part of the School of the South. This was purchased from a name that we've mentioned several times, Mary Ann Martin, at one of the art shows in Miami.
So now this piece is by Wifredo Lam, and it's an important piece in the collection, but it's also important because it was the first piece you ever bought at auction, right?
Well, this painting has a lot of stories to it. We'll talk about the auction first, because indeed it was the first piece that we bought at auction, and that's very exciting in itself. Auctions are very exciting because a lot of money gets spent very quickly. Interestingly enough, it turned out that after we bought this painting, it turned out that Wifredo Lam's son, Esquiel, and his mother were both in the audience at the time, and we met them soon after we purchased this painting. We assumed then that they probably owned the painting and it was sold at auction, because they have not reappeared at any previous auctions, nor have we seen them at auctions since that time. I have met Esquiel at other exhibits where this painting has been shown. It's been shown in a number of different shows in Japan and in Miami and in different places over the years.
And here you have a
Now, here we have,
photograph
this
of Lam in front of that
This
painting,
is a
right?
photograph of Lam in front of this painting. It's an awful good authentication that he did it, and an awful good provenance to show that he owned the painting, in addition to the painting itself. Let me talk a little bit about Lam. Lam's father was Chinese, and his mother was mixed blood Cuban, white and black, and his grandmother was a Santeria priestess, one of the Afro-Cuban religions. And he was with Picasso in Paris when they got all excited about African sculptures and stuff like that. And when he came back to Cuba in 1943 or 44, he said, gee, I know all about this African stuff. My grandmother does this. She's involved with Santeria. And so he began to paint the Santeria spirit figures of the Santeria religion. And that's what this is. This is sort of a transformation of these spirit figures into different forms. And it's called the ritual, La Sacre. And it's in our collection a very important painting of an important period of Wifredo Lam. We have several other Lams, but this is the best of them. And of course it comes with this very nice photograph of Lam and the painting itself.
And this is another example of you collecting an artist in depth with different periods
Right. We
in
have
his career.
Right. This is we have a couple of later ones, which we've been trying to get earlier Lams, but not successfully so far.
Okay, now this next piece is unusual in that the artist, Leonora Carrington, she's considered a Mexican artist, but she's actually from England originally, right? And this piece is actually a lot about that transition from Europe to Mexico.
Of course, Leonora Carrington, this particular painting is one of my favorites. First of all, this is Leonora Carrington in the middle. Leonora Carrington came from a very wealthy British family. I mean, really, they would have audiences with the king and what have you. She was a problem child from the word go. They sent her to private schools. She was always thrown out of private schools for misbehavior. At the age of 18, she met Max Ernst in London, and she developed a relationship with Max Ernst. They went on to Paris and then on to France, and she lived with him for a while.
And he was a very prominent surrealist
He was a very
artist.
prominent surrealist artist, of course. This relationship went on until Max Ernst decided to pick up with Peggy Guggenheim. Now, Carrington didn't really like this very much. So she had sort of a minor nervous breakdown and ended up migrating to Mexico. But the name of the painting is Artes 110. Mexico, that was her first address in Mexico City. But how she got to Mexico was interesting. When she was in the asylum, she developed a relationship with a Mexican diplomat called Ladoc. They got married and for convenience, and he brought her to Mexico. And as I say, this was her first address, her home address in Mexico, Artes 110. But I want to go back a little bit to the painting itself. I did say this was Leonora Carrington. This horse has significant meaning. As a young child, as a teenage child, she had an affinity for a hobby horse. One time she went away and her father broke her hobby horse. She never got over that. And in many of her paintings, you see the appearance of a hobby horse. Also, there are all kinds of little activities going on in the painting. As a child, she had a nanny, an Irish nanny who told her a lot of the Irish fairy tales. So these are also found in her paintings. Being a surrealist, she learned, I'm sure, a lot from Max Ernst, but there's some follow-up on this. There was a Mexican actress called Maria Felix. When Maria Felix died, there was obituary, there was a story about Maria Felix, and one of the paintings that was in possession of, that Maria Felix had, was this particular painting that Ladoc had given her while they were in Mexico. Also, Leonora Carrington did a number of portraits of Maria Felix at the time. So just the human aspect, the story behind it, all of this is the kind of thing that attracts us to Latin American art. So this seems to have all of it. And a fact that it's also part of a surrealistic collection that we do. And as I had mentioned earlier, I did teach school early on. And I think in terms of organization, there is a lot of pieces are surrealist. Actually, the next piece is another surrealist piece by Gunther Gerso. So this is part of a continuous pattern.
All right, now we're going to look at two works by Diego Rivera, well known as a muralist, leader of the Mexican mural movement, but also someone that painted a lot of easel paintings. And maybe you could tell us about this one here, Stanley.
Well, of all the Latin American painters, Diego Rivera is certainly the most important. And indeed, after he studied in Paris and came back to Mexico around 1920, that sort of begins modern Latin American art. And he painted the Mexican peasants. He brought back the skills that he learned in Paris in the early part of the century and brought it back to Paris. And this is a typical painting that he did of a Mexican peasant selling ears of corn. It's got a kind of a mask-like face of a pre-Columbian person. And it's an early painting of this kind. Later on, he found out that if instead of painting ears of corn, he painted calla lilies, that was much more popular and that he could get a lot more money for it. So there's a lot of paintings of calla lilies. But this is an early painting of that of his work. So we've talked about collecting earlier and later works of different artists, and this is an earlier work just as he's getting back from Paris. This over here is a little later work of his more mature period in 1940, and it's a very small but very excellent little painting with color and of a Mexican peasant working. And he did a lot of paintings of Mexican people working and doing things. And this is just a very good quality piece of a little later period, 1940s, as opposed to this piece in 1926.
Okay. Stan had just spoken about an early Diego Rivera. Notice the masked face. Here are two other little interesting Diego Riveras done in the 30s. These are typical Mexicans. You can feel their agony. And this is what Diego Rivera does. But I do want to turn to this little painting by Guillermo Cuitca. One looks at this painting and they say, what on earth is going on? Well, let me tell you, this painting was done in 1983. Guillermo Cuitca was born in 1961. So he was 22 years old when he did this painting. This painting is also dedicated to Josefina Rubinosa, which is one of the reasons that we were attracted to the painting. Josefina Rubinosa was one of these people who had helped Guillermo Cuitca get started in the art world. And he said to her, what can I do to repay you? And she said, do a painting for me. So he did this painting for Rubinosa. Basically, you see a woman holding a child with one hand, and with the other hand, she's pushing a child's head into a toilet bowl. Well, according to the story, Rubinosa had a nanny. Whenever her brother misbehaved, the nanny would stick his head into the toilet bowl. So this is a story about Rubinosa's life, her early life. But in addition to this, it was done at a time when there were the wars in Argentina. So this could be the dirty wars in Argentina. So this could be sort of a reflection of the dirty wars in Argentina. In addition, in this painting, you can see the early formation of what Guillermo Cuitca has been famous for. His large movie scenes. And here you can see the formation of the rooms. And so basically, this is an interesting little painting, but one has to look at it very carefully to totally appreciate it. This painting was done by José Orozco. It was done when he was in the United States in 1931. If you look at this, it tells a story. This was his interpretation of people who go to the Hamptons. So when you get a story like that, this was told to us as we were sitting at a luncheon at Sotheby's several years ago, and they told us a story about Orozco's being in the United States and his interpretation of the Hamptons. One has to buy the painting when you see something like this. At the time he was in the United States, he also did a number of murals, which are very well known. He did a mural at Dartmouth and a mural at Pomona, which is very important. As a follow-up to this little painting, our daughter was in Vietnam, and she was very much impressed with this Orozco painting and his interpretation of people who go to the Hamptons. So she had a painting done by an artist in Vietnam, and this is a copy of this painting representing, I don't know whether she was representing my father-in-law and my mother-in-law or us, I have no idea, but this, my husband says it's representing us, but I don't know. Anyway, this is just a follow-up to that little painting.
So here we have two works, one by a Venezuelan artist named Armando Reveron, and then by a Brazilian artist named Portinari. And the Reveron is interesting. He's well known for doing these very white, very washed out images. Can you tell us a little bit about
well, basically, Armando Reveron from Venezuela is a beach bum, and he did his paintings on the beach. So the sun would wash out his paintings. So we've kept looking at his paintings. Some of them are almost white, and they're very expensive, and you look at this white canvas and you wonder why, but basically, this was sort of a compromise. There is some color in it. We looked for many, many years for a Reveron, so when we found this, we were delighted to have a Reveron. We really wanted a work by him, and we really love the work. It still shows the quality of lightness from the sun, but does have a little color so that we can see an image.
And the second one by Portinari is a study for a much larger piece.
Yeah. Basically, this is part, as Peter said, part of a study for the different industries in Brazil. It was gotten in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and this is a woodworking industry. It's a study for a larger painting, but what's interesting in this painting is how we got it. We actually bought it in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We were invited down there to see an art show, and of course if you go see an art show, you go see art galleries. We were specifically looking for work in Brazil, and we did a lot of, when you go to a foreign country looking for a specific piece, you better know what galleries you're going to in order for defending yourself against fakes and what have you. So we wandered into this gallery that we knew was legitimate. We bought this piece, but little stories that happen when you go to trips in a foreign country. When we were in the gallery, we met another collector, and he said, "You want to come see my collection?" Well, we're on vacation. What else do we have to do? So we said, "Sure." He took us to his home in an armored vehicle. So that tells you a little bit about the safety of Sao Paulo, Brazil. But the painting is a wonderful painting, having people, which is what, the kind of thing we like. It tells a story. We love the painting.
Okay, so we're looking at several really wonderful drawings here, and Stanley, maybe you can tell us about them. Maybe we'll start with Cavalcante, which looks very German or something.
Yes, well actually Di Cavalcante was a Brazilian artist, and he was working in Paris in the early 30s. Everybody went to Paris to study between the wars. And Di Cavalcante specialized in painting women of the evening. And this is certainly a woman of the evening with her customers. And what's interesting about this is that because everybody was together in Paris and stealing from one another, this looks like German Expressionism. And this character over here almost looks like Toulouse-Lautrec. But anyhow, it's a very beautiful, it's a pastel done early on in his career and when he was in Paris. So it's a little different because of the German expressionism of these figures around here. It's a very interesting little painting. He went back to Paris and of course continued to paint women. This Toledo is a contemporary Mexican painter who lives in Oaxaca. He's kind of a farm type character and he tends to paint farm animals and things that happen on the farm. And this is an interesting painting because sometimes as you look at it, it takes a while to figure out just what's going on. And when we had this painting exhibited at the museum, and I would go around with people looking at the painting, I found that there was a definite correlation. The older you were, the longer it took to figure out what was going on with this painting. Our 14-year-old grandchild figured it out immediately, but people who are on Medicare seem to have trouble understanding it. This is called Tres Sombreros, and you can see this guy's hat is being blown off by whatever's going on here. Very important artist, and this is a work of the 1970s, his best period. We've got a couple of other works by Toledo at different periods of his career. An early one from 1967 and a somewhat later one. Another important artist that I think we mentioned initially was Mata. Mata was what he called a abstract surrealist. Surrealistic paintings, but somewhat abstract. This little painting here is important because it was done in 1935, and as far as we can identify, this is probably the earliest little drawing that he did. It's hard to identify, but there are two figures curled into here, and it's called the Isthmus of Panama because it has sort of the general shape of that small isthmus, but there are two people that are sort of intertwined with one another. Organic figures. Later on, he did other things that were more abstract than this. And still later on, we have paintings in the 50s where there are more geometric and more space-like designs. But this is a very interesting little painting, and you almost have to get very close to it to really figure out what's the little sexual innuendos that are going on within that painting. One of the things we talked about early on was how we occupy our time since we've been collecting art. And as things would happen, while we're doing this shoot, we were fortunate to have FedEx to deliver a painting that we had just purchased about 2 weeks ago at Christie's at auction.
Gorgeous.
Okay, here we go.
Wolfgang Palin.
Wolfgang Palin.
Fits right into your surrealist theme.
Right, this is he's actually German, and he's part of that Mexican surrealist group that came over just at the time of World War II. And he was married to a French artist, Alice Rehun, whose paintings we've been trying to get, but not successfully so far. And as part of that group with Carrington and Remedios Varro. So we've been sort of collecting this group of Mexican expatriate surrealists, and this is one of them. This is certainly a very surrealistic painting. Sort of looks like Yves Tanguay, I think.
Very much.
But,
yeah.
Okay. What else?
Wonderful. What a great, what a great way to wrap
somewhere
things up.
along the way, we're going to have to figure out where to
Unwrap
hang
things.
this.
Hang it, that's the next
Where to
question.
hang it.